In this video, I'm going to show you how I created this. Hello everyone, this is Seraltos and I'm Travis. This video is a little different from other videos that I've done. It contains information I've already covered. It also adds some new stuff, including application insight, cost management, and a little on Raspberry Pi at the end. I don't intend to go very deep into any of those subjects that I've already covered. I'm just going to reference them as I move along. Before that, please take a second to subscribe and click the bell icon if you want a notification when I publish new content. In this video, I'm going to pick up where my last Grafana video left off with performance data from my test lab. After that, I'm going to set up the connection to application insight so I can pull data and statistics from my blog to display on the dashboard. I'm going to build an Azure automation runbook that will upload Azure consumptions or spend data into log analytics. I'll use that to track my Azure subscription spend over the month. Once that's done, I'll configure Grafana for anonymous kiosk mode and use a Raspberry Pi to display the data. I also have some hints on mounting hardware. If you plan to follow along, you're going to need a few things. First, a Grafana server. See my other videos on setting that up. Note that the new version of Grafana has the Azure Monitor Data Source plugin pre-installed, so you don't have to add that manually as I demonstrate in one of my videos. This is a good sign of the commitment between Azure and Grafana. You'll need an Azure subscription and log analytics workspace. Again, see my other videos if you need help with that. I'm going to display data from application insights. I use the WordPress plugin to push data from my blog. I know I sound like a broken record saying it, but I published a whole video on how to set that up, if you're interested in doing the same. Next, I'm going to use an Azure Automation Runbook to gather subscription cost information. A link to the code on my GitHub page will be available below or on my blog. I'm powering the display with Raspberry Pi using FullPage OS. There's a lot of resources on how to set up Raspberry Pis. I'm not going to go into much detail on that. I'll show you how I configured FullPage OS to display the dashboard. And as a side note on that, I originally tried to use a Raspberry Pi Zero. That does not have enough power to display the dashboard. It just kind of sits for 20 minutes and then times out. I ended up using a Raspberry Pi 3 Plus for this demo. I also have some mounting hardware and power cables for the install. So with that, let's get started with the first step. I'm going to pick up here where I left off on my last Grafana video. This is my dashboard that we created in the previous one. As you can see here, I have percent processor time, percent commit bytes in use. I've got a list of all the servers that I have monitored, as well as servers that are missing heartbeats within the past 15 minutes. So this is going to be the base. It's going to cover the monitoring of my test lab, and then I'm just going to add on from here. So as I said, I'm just picking up where I left off on the last video. I will say that I did install a new server and install Grafana new. And with the new installations, as I probably mentioned already, the Azure Monitor Data Source comes standard with the new Grafana install, so you don't have to install that separately, as I did in my previous video. So the first thing I'm going to do though, I do like the information here, but I don't like how processor time and commit bytes in use displays. It's got this huge gap. My test lab is pretty low use most of the time. So I'd like to see a little bit more activity, even if it is down to, under 10%. But the reason why I did this originally is I wanted to see if the server is spiking at any time above the 80 or 70% range. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this. And I'll go into visualization. And I'm going to scroll down. Well, actually, I'm going to first go here and remove the 0 and the 100. And you can see as soon as I do that, I get a little bit more detail, although it's still pretty low. It does give me detail, which I guess looks a little bit more impressive. Aesthetics is an important thing in this as well. So I'm going to add a threshold. So the first threshold is going to be greater than 50%. And that's going to trigger a warning. And then I'm going to add another threshold. And I'm going to set that to 75%. And that's going to go critical. Now once I do this, what it's going to do is if my CPU gets above 50%, it's going to go into an orange or warning state. And I'll be able to see that just at a glance looking at my dashboard. If it goes above 75%, then it's going to go into a red. Here, I'll show you. I've got a screenshot that I took earlier when this happened. Okay, So I'm going to do that. That's good. And I'm going to go back and I'll just save that real quick. I like to save it for each change. And then I'm going to go into committed bytes in use and edit. And we're going to do a similar thing here. So I'm going to scroll down and add a threshold. And we'll say 75%. I'm going to go to warning. And then another one if it's greater than 85%. And you can obviously pick whatever you want. I'm going to go to critical. And then we'll go back. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to change the legend details here. Where is that? The min-max value. So I got to delete these. Once I do that, you can see now it's just showing more data. So this looks better. Now I get more detail in my graphics, and I'll also be alerted if something goes above those defined thresholds. I'm going to save again. All right, now that that's in place, I'm going to add a couple more visualizations here. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into my data sources. And I'm going to pick Application Insights. Oh, but you know what I forgot to do? I need to go back and talk about Application Insights a little bit. So I added the Application Insights plugin to my blog, and that's feeding data into my application workspace or Application Insights workspace. So what I need to do is set up the data source to pull data from Application Insights. Now, if you're interested in doing this, I have a video that shows how to add the Application Insights plugin to WordPress. You can go back and watch that. But for now, I'm just going to go to, let's see here, let's save that. And I know I can go into data sources. There we go. So in Application Insights, I need to add an API key and I need to add an application ID. Okay, so there we go. Now we've got the API key and the application ID added, and that's going to give us access into Application Insights. So let's go back to my dashboard, not new dashboard. There we go. I'm going to modify this one. So I've got Application Insights. I'm going to change this to user count. There it is. We'll go to specific time gain. Okay, so one thing I want to point out is now Application Insights, I don't have to enter in a query like I did with Log Analytics. All of these are already defined. One thing to note, because I'm using the WordPress plugin, I can't get access to the underlying OS settings or information like performance counter, CPU percent, or memory. That stuff isn't exposed to the level that I'm tracking information at the WordPress plugin. So I can get site-specific data, but this is a shared plan, so I can't get access to the CPU, memory, disk IOPS, that kind of stuff. If you're using IIS that you install yourself, or if you're using app service, you can get access to that information, but here I just can't. So I'm going to do user count, then I'm going to go into virtualization. One thing I'm going to do is change this to blue. Everything that's WordPress related is going to be blue or have some indication by blue. So I'm going to leave that as blue. Then I'm going to come down and actually I'm just going to leave it like this. So now I'll go into general. And I do want to have a title for this. And when I put this into production, I'm going to change this all to transparent. But for now, I'm going to leave it not transparent because I want to see where I position all this stuff. I'm going to save again. So I'm going to add another. And this one's going to be failed requests. So I'm going to come back up here, make sure that's set to Application Insights, and then we'll go into failed requests. If I can find it. I guess that's request failed. There we go. And again, I'll change this to blue. There we go. I'm going to do something a little different to this one. I'm going to come down. I'm going to set the same types of thresholds. Let's see, if it's greater than 20 failed requests, I'm going to go to critical. And then if it's greater than 15 failed requests, we'll go to warning. And if it's greater than, actually less than 15, we'll say okay. I don't know that I agree with those numbers totally, but it works for me for now. And then I'll come down here and give it a name. And I'm just going to move this one down here. I'm going to add another one. I'm going to call this one request count. So we'll go to Application Insights again and request count. We'll go into visualization. And I'm going to change this from a graph to a heat map. I will be the first to admit I may not be using the heat map in the actual proper way, but I do like the visualization and it does tell me the information I need. So I'm just going to run with it. Show legend. There we go. So this gives me an idea of how many requests are coming in. That's different than user count. Users can have multiple requests. Then I'll come down here to panel title. Give that a name. Okay, so good. We're making progress here. We're getting some real useful information out of this. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to measure availability. So I'm going to add another. This time I'm going to do a single stat. Let's go back up to the queries. We're going to select Application Insight again and availability results, availability percentage. See if I can find that in here. There we go. So aggregation is average, group by none. This all looks good. Now it's just showing 100 there, and I'm going to change that. So I actually want to gauge. I'm going to change the unit to %. I'm going to make the threshold 90. And I'm going to make this a gauge. There we go. That's almost okay, but let's invert that. There we go. And let's go to threshold labels. There we go. So now what it's going to do is it's going to measure my availability, and that's coming from an availability test that Application Insights is running. If my % goes below 90, this will turn red. The 90 or whatever percentage it is, it will turn red, and that big green bar, the thick stuff here, will also turn red. Here, actually, I can show you a picture of it because I had a minor outage during a server upgrade recently, and I took a screenshot of it, so I'll show that now. Here you can see how it changes when my availability drops below 90%. The only thing left to do is change the title. I'll just make that a little bit smaller. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is I need to add another gauge that shows my spend. And for that, I'm going to hop over to Azure Automation. Okay, so this is going to take a little explaining. If you're not familiar with log analytics, please jump back. I have a whole bunch of videos on it. You don't have to go too deep to understand what I'm doing, but I'll go over it briefly. I want to keep track of how much I spend on Azure every day or every month. There are some commands that I can run here. I can scroll down and show them that actually pull consumption data from billing. So it's get AZ consumption details. I've got that right here. And then get, let's see here, get AZ consumption budget. So within Azure Cost Management, you can set a budget. And in my case, it's $100. So, but if I ever change that, I don't want to have to go in and hard code dashboards and make those changes. This is going to get my budget amount. It's also going to get the consumption details, which is a daily spend record within that billing period. And all I'm doing here is I'm getting that budget amount, and then I'm getting the day. I'm going to get some usage details with that AZ consumption usage detail. And then let's see, I'm going to take and sum that into one a lump sum, so I know how much month to date that I'm spending. And then I'm going to build a hash table with all that information and pass that into Log Analytics. So in order to pass it into Log Analytics, I have a function that I wrote that will take anything in hash table and pass it into Log Analytics. So that's what I'm using. That's what all this up here is. I've got it pretty well documented. I think I even did a video or something that goes over how I did it. You're free to use it. I'll make this available. Check the link below, I'm sure, or my blog post that accompanies this, and you'll be able to get information. But so what this basically does is it just grabs the billing consumption details, and then it passes that into Log Analytics. So then from Log Analytics, I can query that and pull information into my dashboard. So this is an Azure Automation Runbook, and I can just tell it to run every day at midnight, and it's going to update the information in Log Analytics. Let's go over to Log Analytics and take a look at that information. Here's my spend. So if I run that, this is going to show for the last 24 hours. I change that time range to, let's say, 7 days. Here's what it looks like. So we can see my budget. I've got a billing period. The billing period is the year and month that the bill will be due. So you can see I have all of these for May 2019, and then I have one popping in here for June 2019. So I'm just going to pull all this data into Log Analytics and then build a gauge out from that. So with that, let's build that gauge. And again, if I didn't go over this well enough, everything that I'm doing, I have another video that goes into it in way more detail. If it's something you're interested in doing, you can either just grab my script and set up a runbook, or you can go back in those videos and they go over what I'm doing pretty thoroughly. So I'm going to create a new visualization. And again, that's going to be a single stat. Let's go up here. I'm going to change this to Log Analytics. I'll drop in the query, and again, this will all be available. And then let's just run that. Oh, I forgot this. It has to be set to a table. Okay, so that's the billing period. We can fix that. For a column, we're going to change it from period to period spend. There we go, $8. And I'm going to just shrink the font size on this a little bit. We'll call that spend. And we're going to change that unit to dollars. And we're going to change this to show the gauge. And we also want the threshold labels on. Okay, so we're getting close. I'm going to change the threshold to 60 and 80. So what this means is as I get closer to, if I get above 60%, and being that it's $100, it's just above $60, it'll go into orange, and then if I go above 80, it's going to go into red. Let's change the value here. There we go. Now the value will change color as my amount of spend goes up. This is an important one for me because all of this Azure spend is out of pocket. I'm not getting reimbursed for it. So I want to make sure that I don't leave a very expensive VM running or set up too many managed disks that start costing me money. This will help me see that information just at a glance. The only thing left to do is change the panel title. I'll just drop that in there. Okay, so I'm getting close. I do want to modify this a bit. First, the gauge does not have to be as big as it is, so I can shrink this down. I can actually take this and put it right next to that one. And you know what? I actually want it over here. So now what I'm going to do is just make a little adjustments, make it fit on the screen better. I can make this a little smaller. And actually that's server information, so I'm going to put that down here. So I want request count up top. And I want user count. Again, I'm sticking with that blue theme for anything website related. I'm going to make this failed request a little bit smaller. Interesting note about failed request. I'm getting a lot of 404s for Apple Touch icons. It's actually looking better because I added a whole bunch of icons into my site, but I'm still missing a couple. That's a topic for a different day though. I'm going to make this a little smaller. I actually want this over here. Oh. This is the neat thing about Grafana is you can just kind of drag and drop. And hopefully you can see on the screen, all of these windows have a shaded gray background. I'm going to actually change that once I get this all laid out the way I want it. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, I'm going to make these all transparent. Just go into Edit, go to General, and check the transparent box. Oh, look at that. It must have been failed a query at one point. Okay, so I'm just going to go in here and go to Edit. And I'll spare you with the rest and just do it. Okay, that's done. The backgrounds are all transparent now. I just think that looks a little bit better. Up here, make sure you have this set to show the whatever amount of hours you want. 12, I normally stick with 6. Make sure you're refreshing every 10 seconds or at least frequently enough to show information you want to see. Once that's done, one final save. And now we're going to start configuring some of the kiosk modes and anonymous access. Okay, everyone, we have the dashboard set up the way we want it. You can make changes as you see fit, but for this, I'm going to continue on. Now, one of the things I'm going to do is come into Home, and I'm going to star this Dashboard, Seraltos. And then I'm going to go into Preferences. And the first thing I'm going to do is change the organization name to Seraltos. The organization name will be needed in a future step. So I'm just going to click Save to save that. The UI theme is, we can leave that to default. You can select dark or light if you'd like to. The Home Dashboard, it's set to default. I'm going to set this to Seraltos. Now, if you don't see Seraltos in the list, you have to go back. Just a couple seconds ago, I went into, let's see here. Let's just go back. I starred this, you have to star that. So let's go back into Preferences. We'll set that. And time zone, I'm going to use local browser. You can set it to default or save it as UTC if you'd like. Okay, so what this is going to do, it gives me an organization name. It's also going to set the Home Dashboard. So if I go in and do a incognito window, and I forgot what IP address that was. There it is. Okay, it's going to take me straight to my dashboard, which is exactly what I want. You can see it's going to do 6 hours and or show the last 6 hours and refresh every 10 seconds. I'm just going to copy this so I don't have to type it in again, because I will be coming back into here. Okay, so when I log in, I'm going straight to my dashboard. As before, I was coming into, I think it was, nope. I think it was the manage. Anyway, I'm going into the dashboard now. So I'll go home. Okay, now I'm going to make another change. I'm going to cycle my view. You can see we have different view modes. So I'm going to go to kiosk mode. So in order to view in kiosk mode, we actually have to have that kiosk right here. So let's try that. Perfect. Okay, so we also need to save that link. That's going to be very important coming up. I'm just going to pop it into another spot here. Okay, so now we've got the dashboard the way we want it to display. Now the next step is to enable anonymous authentication. In order to do that, you're going to have to log into the Grafana server. All right, here I am logged into the Grafana server. I'm using Putty. You can use whatever else you want to use, or if you have console access, you can do it that way. So let's see here. Let me just see where we're at. I'm going to change directories to etc. And within there, there's going to be a directory called Grafana. And in that directory is grafana.ini. Now I'm going to edit this file. So how I'm going to edit that is do sudo. That will give me elevated rights so I can modify this file. And then I'm going to use vi and grafana.ini. If you have a preference on text editors you like to use with Linux, go ahead. And I'm having a hard time seeing this, but I have to go down to an anonymous authentication section. Let's see here. Anonymous authentication. Okay, so there's two lines that I found I need to enable. And I'm actually going to comment out this, but first I'm going to do YY to copy it, and then a P to paste. Oh, I'll go back and edit that later. And I need the org name, so I'll do YY, and then P. Now, if you're not familiar with using VI, or VI is what I normally call it, I'll call out the steps that I'm taking. So now that I've copied those lines, I'm just going to do an I for insert. That's going to put me in edit mode. I'm going to comment out that. I think that semicolon was a comment, but just to be sure. And now I'm just moving my arrows and entering. So I'm going to remove the comment from that line and change this to true. And remember when I said we would need that organization name later? Here we go. I guess you could have left it default, but I did not. Now, one thing to keep in mind, once I enable anonymous mode, I'm not going to be able to log in and modify this dashboard. So that's why I wanted to make sure everything was set the way I wanted it from the beginning. If you need to edit it, simply come back in here, put a comment, the # in front of enable and org name, and then restart the service. That's all you need to do, and then you modify your dashboard, and then when you're done, come back and uncomment those lines, save it, and restart the service. So now that I'm done editing this file, I'm going to hit escape. That takes me out of insert mode. The colon will put me into command line. This is where I can do activities. Now, if you just screwed this up and you're panicked, don't worry, just go Q and exclamation point and hit enter. That will take you out of edit mode without saving any changes. So what it's saying is quit without saving, or just quit. But I do not want to do that. I want to do Q and W. W means quit and write. So that's going to update the file. Actually, it's write quit. It would make sense to write before you quit. So there we go. Now I'm going to restart the service. I'm going to do that with sudo service Grafana server -server restart. All this is available on the Grafana website as far as how to change this. Also, if you do a search for VI commands, you can come up with all this pretty quickly. So now, remember when I said we had to save that URL? Now I'm going to come in and open up a new incognito window and paste that URL in. Cross my fingers. Bam. So let me explain what I just did. So we modified this dashboard exactly how we wanted it. And then we went into Grafana and we told it to allow anonymous read-only access. And then with that link that says put it in kiosk mode, we were able to log in without any authentication. This is important because in the next step, I'm going to use Raspberry Pi with FullPage OS. FullPage OS has no ability to log into a website. It just pulls up and displays one web page. So I'm going to use the URL that we saved in the settings to tell it to open up this Grafana web page. So while we're at it, let's just start talking about FullPage OS. FullPage OS is a Raspberry Pi OS that's built to do two things: connect to a wireless access point and display a web page. This is what I'm going to use to power the display. I'm using a Raspberry Pi 3 Plus. I did try a Raspberry Pi Zero, and it does not have enough power to display the graphs. It sat for about 20 minutes and then eventually timed out, and it just didn't work. So save yourself a lot of frustration and waiting, and just get a Raspberry Pi 3 if you plan on doing this. I'm not going to go over how to install FullPage OS. There's a lot of documentation on how to install OSs on Raspberry Pi. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for me to go over that. But once you get Raspberry Pi installed, we need to log in. Now there's two ways to configure the FullPage OS on Raspberry Pi. I'm going to SSH into it. You could put in the micro SD card and scroll to the two files and open them up in Windows, but do not open them up with the text editor. Here, let me show you. I'll start by coming down into requirements. There's two files you'll need to modify: FullPage OS WPA subclient. So let's take a look at that. Here I'm logged in, and we're just going to take a look at that. Now I'm not doing this with elevated privileges because this is already configured. But the one thing that I want to point out that I started saying before: heads up Windows users, do not use WordPad for editing this file. Okay, so what it's telling you is use either Notepad++, VS Code, Atom, Sublime Text, proper text editor. So just follow those directions. You could, like I said, you could open this file in Notepad++ on Windows and do what I'm doing here. Within this file, the FullPage OS -WPA subclient, I'm just going to go down. There's two settings. One is the SSID, and if you scroll down, it's going to ask for a password. I am not going to scroll down because I don't want to expose that. So I think you'll get the point though. That's where your SSID goes, as well as the password. The next one I'm going to edit, and this time I am going to do sudo to actually edit it. FullPage OS. Oh, I forgot to type that in. Okay, so this is the it's the URL for the kiosk mode for our dashboard. So you can enter this like we did before, where you hit I for insert, and then type or paste it in. And then when you're done, hit escape, colon, and either WQ to update it, or just Q, bang, to exit. So that's all there is to it. Once you have that in place, reboot the Raspberry Pi, and it should pull up the dashboard in kiosk mode as it boots. Next, I have to mount the monitor and the Raspberry Pi. So I just marked the location where I wanted it to be on the wall and started drilling holes. I'm not going to go too deep into that because I assume you probably know how to do that. Here are the cables that I used. I found a power cable that has two female ends. One end goes into the monitor. The other end is a normal plug that I can plug the Raspberry Pi into. Ideally, I would have had a monitor with a USB port that I could just plug in the Raspberry Pi to that for power. And then I have a short HDMI to DVI connector. I'm using an older salvage monitor for this project that doesn't have a HDMI port. Here I'm putting on the mounting hardware. I'm also running the cables up. I was originally going to put the Raspberry Pi on top, but I actually opted to hang it off underneath and to the side. Lastly, this is it booting up. Power on to the dashboard displaying only took about a minute, but I am going to fast forward this just to get through it a little quicker. And there you can see Grafana is loading and the dashboard is displaying. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope you found this useful and informative. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon if you want to get notifications for new content. Thanks again.